Loose lips sink ships, read the poster during World War II. The U.S. government was then urging citizens to refrain from sharing what might even seem like benign information to the untrained ear. Now, it was only a matter of time before Europe's first ground war since the information age began sprang a leak that might be anything but benign. In fact, it's a miracle this didn't happen sooner. The so-called Pentagon files, or Pentagon leaks, however you call them, coming out in a very 21st century kind of way. First, it seems in a chat room among gamers, before graduating to Twitter and Telegram, and now to journalists following up on a trove of documents that appeared to be 5 weeks old, some authentic, some apparently doctored. We'll ask about what we're certain of. Spoiler, not much yet. Who could have done it and why? Perhaps we need to trace our steps backwards and ask who stands to benefit from claims that Ukraine needs a lot more weapons for a spring offensive, that the West is happily reading and listening to a lot of what Russian intelligence is serving up these days, and that Washington spies on its allies too. More broadly, how does it impact the war that's unfolding? Today in the France 24 debate, we're putting the spotlight on those Pentagon leaks. Joining us from Ann Arbor, Michigan, he's a former FBI agent who also worked for the U.S. Homeland Security Department on counterterrorism. Javed Ali, associate professor at the University of Michigan's Gerald Ford School of Public Policy. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Retired General Dominique Trinquant is the former head of the French military mission to the United Nations. Welcome back. I want to welcome back as well Samantha de Benden, former NATO officer today. You are an associate fellow at the think tank Chatham House.
Yes, I am.
Nice
Good
to see
evening.
you. And with a sociologist, Davina Frau-Meggs, professor emeritus at Sorbonne Nouvelle University. Sussing out disinformation is your remit. Thanks for joining us.
And it's not stopping.
It's not stopping, indeed. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation you have on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Now, still no arrest, or arrests plural, as the revelations keep coming. More on this from Laurent Berstecker.
They've been circulating online for days. Dozens of copies of highly classified U.S. intelligence documents widely shared on social media platforms such as Discord, Telegram, and Twitter. Faced with what could be the country's worst national security leak in years, U.S. officials are still trying to assess the scope of the damage.
We take this very seriously, and we will continue to investigate and turn over every rock until we find the source of this and the extent of it.
Many of the documents contain sensitive information on the war in Ukraine. These include maps of Ukrainian military positions, assessments of international support for Kyiv, and of potential vulnerabilities in the country's air defense capacities. Possibly even more damaging for Washington, the documents also highlight how the U.S. closely monitors and spies on its allies. A potential diplomatic time bomb which could erode its international credibility.
No other country is leaking information at that scale. Imagine this would have happened in the UK again and again and again and again. The US probably would have stopped intelligence sharing. Human sources are involved. And so adversaries will try to discover how the United States intelligence community was able to collect on them, change their setup, potentially go after spies.
Determined to get to the bottom of the scandal, the Pentagon launched an internal review and the Justice Department a criminal investigation into how the slides were obtained. On Tuesday, U.S. officials who have yet to fully authenticate the documents said a large number appeared to be fabricated.
Before I ask you about the latest, Javed Ali, can you just respond to what you heard that commentator say? Are Americans bad at keeping secrets?
That's an interesting question. I would argue the answer to that is no, we are not bad, and we have a vast intelligence community. I was part of that for 16 years, and unfortunately, all it takes is one bad apple to cause an incident like this, or a handful of individuals. But the overwhelming majority of the people who show up every day to go to work in the intelligence community do the right thing, and it's only when these unfortunate developments happen that there's this perception that we're sloppy and we can't keep secrets and we're just not good at sort of protecting this very sensitive information. And I'm not trying to minimize the impact of what's happened here, but But these are anomalies, and that to me is at least the upside of this. This doesn't happen as often as people think.
It doesn't happen as often as people think, or, Dominique Trinquant, it doesn't get put in the public realm as often as people think. Perhaps people are bad at keeping secrets, but those secrets are kept under wraps.
Yes, it's always very embarrassing to have leaks like that, because you don't know from where it's coming. Either it's a leak from the service, the intelligence which is going to a journalist or someone, or perhaps it's the impact of a foreign service which is taking this information. Apparently, the information provided is just photograph taken on papers. So someone was taken a photograph and then sent it to a journalist, either people from the U.S. intelligence or either from other services trying to target the U.S. This is the real question.
Will it be easy to catch these people, Davina Frau Meggs? With photographs these days, is it easy to identify who took the picture?
You could, because now with OSINT, which is the open source investigation systems, you can actually geolocalize and time when these documents were taken. So I suspect that is what is happening at the moment. But to go back to your original question, there's several answers to your question. Because there's the Pentagon has sometimes asked for hacking just so that vulnerabilities could be found. So there's been several programs about debugging the Pentagon and calls on hackers to do it. So,
but what General Trinquant just described, does that count as hacking? Somebody taking a picture of a document in a meeting and then posting it?
Well, it becomes a hack when it's leaked and when it was not intentional. So then you see the other pattern that we've seen with this information. And for me, what you've described, the timing, the slow dribbling, the catching up on some fringe websites and apps, then caught up by people like gamers who are for radical transparency of information, willing to free information, the sort of libertarian kinds that exist in America. Then the catching up and the whitewashing, as I call it, by the larger media, etc. To me, that's a hack and dribble and open up a scandal to destabilize. And that's a pattern from Russia.
It's a pattern from Russia, you say?
Well, there is actually a very important distinction between a hack and a leak. A hack will come from the outside. It would be a malevolent actor. It could be Russia. It could be someone else who is penetrating a computer system or a server or an individual computer and extracting information from that source of information. A leak is somebody from the inside acquiring the information in a legal way, or if it's photographing a computer screen and it's not legal, but it's actually acquiring information that this person legally has access to and then releasing it to the general public. So that is the big distinction between a hack and a leak. And what is happening in this situation is that it looks very much like it is a leak. So somebody who has legally been able to obtain this information has decided to then make it public. So it could be a mole who is acting illegally and has illegally obtained clearance for this information. But it is very different from a hack when an outside malign actor will penetrate something they do not have the legal authorization to penetrate.
Can I add a third word? Plant. Because you have leaks with apparently a plant, which is to say what happens in disinformation, real information, and in there, manipulated, transformed information that is fake and is aimed at destabilizing, etc., etc.
All right. Before we try to lay blame, and the plant one, I want to get back to as well.
Great.
Let's try to work backwards. The U.S. Defense Secretary says he first got wind of the leak on April the 6th, but the documents quietly surfaced 5 weeks earlier, possibly earlier. The Guardian reports that the first appearance of the documents could have been on a server called Thug Shaker Central, among other names, as far back as October. They later made the jump to Discord. That's a platform where gamers can dialogue amongst each other. And as Arik Toller, one of the investigative news website journalists from Bellingcat, writes, Bizarrely, the Discord channel in which the documents dated from March were posted focused on the Minecraft computer game and phantom of a Filipino YouTube celebrity. Altered documents appeared then afterwards, and so did the others, and then they spread. So, Javed Ali, how did we go from fans of a YouTuber to classified secrets?
Yeah, there's another one of these unresolved questions, but my own suspicion at this point leads me to believe that we're dealing with a lone offender who, and other panelists already said this, who was someone who was already inside the US intelligence community as a government employee like myself or a contractor, had access to these top secret, specially compartmented information systems, which are very restrictive, and then perhaps over time and in batches, took the document, printed these briefing slides out, literally carry them out of whatever facility they were in, and then took pictures of them, or also took pictures of them while they were in the facility, which you're also not supposed to do. You can't bring a phone into these facilities. So it doesn't look like it was one specific dump or haul, but it looked like it was happening over time. And at no time was this person being identified or flagged, because if the information was showing up as late as last year and then migrating to different platforms, there's no way for the intelligence community to catch that in advance. Our system just isn't designed.
Yeah, hold on. I want to hammer home that point there. So there is this perception among the general public that the intelligence community sees all and knows all, but this stuff was out there a long time.
We can see a lot and know a lot when we're looking for it or looking at it, and we have the authorities and the capabilities to engage in collection on it. But when it's an insider threat, someone who's already theoretically approved to handle or deal with this type of material, there's not much to stop someone, unfortunately, and hopefully this will change, from doing exactly what they did. Again, printing these documents out, walking out of the building, bringing your phone into the facility, taking pictures, and then uploading them onto Discord or any other social media platform. Our system is designed to keep people outside of the facilities and off our internal intelligence computer networks, but it's much, much harder for someone who's already cleared, already inside the facility. And if you're determined to engage in that level of illegal activity, there's very little, at least right now, that can stop that. And unfortunately,
and based on your personal experience, is that person going to get caught quickly?
I would hope so. And my colleagues back at the FBI and the Pentagon, I'm sure, there has to be a multi-pronged investigation going on, looking at a bunch of different things that other panelists have talked about. And it is going to be a very unpleasant and uncomfortable experience for the people as the dragnet sort of starts to hone in on a smaller group of individuals. Those people are going to be put through the investigative ringer and face a lot of really tough questions and other sort of investigative methods that are going to be used. Eventually, this person is going to be found, or persons, but I still think we're dealing with a lone offender, someone like a Chelsea Manning, an Edward Snowden, and for whatever reason, they decided to engage in this activity, and whether they thought they were going to get caught or not, eventually this will catch up to them.
So they were either disgruntled or a bit of bravado among your friends who you play games with. I don't know. General Trinquant, nonetheless, what we're getting since last week is this steady drip of, I don't know if they're alleged revelations, in some cases they're confirmed, in other cases not. Like, for instance, something that we assume anytime there's a conflict, that there are special forces from the US and others that are present already in Ukraine, even though officially they're not. Do those kinds of revelations hurt the Allied cause?
Of course, it's always difficult for an ally to know that the information providing to, say, the US will leak somewhere. Usually, you are very careful with all the information which is provided to you. So when it's leaking like that, it is embarrassing for the people who are protecting the intelligence and for the people who are providing the intelligence. That's why you've got schemes, very strong schemes, where you don't provide the sources, for example. And so, for example, when you talk about special forces, we mixed everything. In France, special forces and forces from the DGSE are not the same, and they are not special forces. As in
DGSE
the US,
is the French
everybody is
equivalent of
special
MI6.
forces.
Yeah.
Yes, and in UK, for example, SAS are working either for the military or for the services. So in France, it's very quite cut. It's not at all the same. So we don't know, for example, I'm speaking specifically for the French, they are saying, I think, 5 or 15 special forces people. They are probably not special forces, but coming from the DGSE, because the French special forces can't be in Ukraine due to the French position.
Well, it's their names have not come up yet, by the way, but it'll be interesting to see. Samantha de Bendren, if I'm Volodymyr Zelensky, this is great news, these leaks. What are they essentially saying? Please, the Ukrainians don't have enough weapons. Please send them more aircraft or help their anti-aircraft system.
Well, it's yes and no. I would say on the one hand, it is really making the whole world aware of a fact that people who have been studying the crisis, the war in Ukraine carefully, are aware of the fact that Ukraine is running out of munitions. And that the air defense is in a dire strait. And the Russians, I don't think, have learned anything new with these leaks, because the Russians have been targeting Ukraine for months now, making Ukraine use up its air defense system to protect its vital infrastructure, to protect its cities. So the Russians won't really have learned anything new. But yes, it is in a way good news for Ukraine that the whole world will now be putting more pressure, hopefully, on their governments to provide Ukraine with more air defense, particularly potentially with aircraft. At the same time, Ukraine has been guarding its losses, that the Ukrainian losses in this war, be it in manpower or in infrastructure, is one of the most tightly guarded secrets in this war. They do not want their own population to know how dire the situation is because of the effect this could have on morale. So that is not good news for Ukraine. So it is a double-edged sword. There has been speculation that this perhaps there could be a Ukrainian hand behind this. I think that the damage that is done to Ukraine is far greater than the advantage, and I do not see a Ukrainian hand in this leak.
All right. Well, let me put that to let me ask you about that, because we have the spying on allies. And from Edward Snowden's whistleblowing leaks of NSA files, we knew that already. Still, for the likes of South Korea, it stings. There is the documents that show how the Seoul is worried about military aid that it gives going directly to Ukraine, and therefore putting South Korea on a collision course with Moscow. Let's listen to retired South Korean General Kim Byung-ju, now a member of parliament.
We strongly regret that the top U.S. intelligence agency had been illegally spying on allies like our country. We demand a thorough investigation and urge that similar incidents do not occur again.
So that was Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, we learned that South Korea is going to lend 500,000 artillery shells to the United States. So are these leaks, in fact, making a difference or even helping Ukraine's cause?
I think that they might end up helping Ukraine's cause, but what will not help Ukraine's cause is the fact that Ukraine also knows the extent to which the US is spying on Ukraine, and that will reduce intelligence sharing amongst Ukrainians and the Americans, and that will also reduce the Americans' ability to continue helping Ukraine. So that it's a double-edged sword here. That the biggest damage to these leaks is not to the Ukrainian counteroffensive, because no plans were actually leaked, and things can be changed. The damage that has been done by these leaks is amongst allies and allied cohesion. So that is not something that is either in Ukraine's advantage either, because Ukraine needs a united NATO, it needs a united European Union, and these leaks are emphasizing the sentiment amongst allies that while the US is really spying on us and will also impede intelligence sharing. So again, there are definite advantages to Ukraine with this. We've seen discussions today about F-16s going to Ukraine. perhaps these leaks have accelerated this, and this could be an unintended positive consequence of the leaks. But imagine the US will. I think they will find out who's behind these leaks. Imagine if they find out it is some kind of officially Ukrainian-sanctioned action, that whoever inside the administration leaked these documents had a relationship with Ukraine. That would be disastrous. Is it a pro-Ukrainian person in the admin? Maybe, maybe not. That cannot be discounted.
Will this have an impact in the long run, General Trinquant? Will there be less intelligence sharing?
I think people will be careful about the intelligence they are providing, certainly. But I think that these leaks are very useful for Moscow, for the Russian, not because of the figure they are providing, but just to show that, NATO is really fighting against us. And I'm very surprised that the Russians are not making a fuss about that.
Well, could it be because it's showing up how many holes there are in their own secrets?
Yes, but you show what you want to show. On Moscow screen, you just show that NATO is fighting. I did tell you they are all fighting against us, and this is good news for Moscow.
Altered documents appeared on the Russian-owned social media Telegram after those gaming sites. But that doesn't mean Moscow is behind it, warns the Bellingcat journalist we quoted earlier, Arik Toller. He tweeted the following, that the Russian Telegram channel editing a single file of this leak of 100-plus files was the best thing that could happen for the U.S. government. Now they can claim the whole thing was a Russian op, even though it was just a crappy edit of a single portion of a file. Davina Frau Meggs.
Well, that goes towards the theory of maybe a loner in there, and we've seen examples in America recently, and with the digital age.
So would it be someone who's disgruntled, or would it be somebody who wants to show off to his friends?
I think it's more somebody who is for radical transparency, is against the war. All of these leaks, major leaks before, were against American operations, war operations, and this follows the same pattern. And the idea is you create a scandal and you make a bet that there's going to be a public outrage in the US, because there's also that. There's also discrediting the policy of Biden at the moment, showing that there is NATO, that it's united, so that can hurt the US. But what we know through history is that these raw revelations, when they're not reinterpreted, re-intermediated by journalists and people like that, they're not effective. It doesn't rile public opinion. At the moment, we've seen that inside the US, the Republican Party is remaining relatively quiet. There's no stir. And this is what happened after Snowden, after the great resilience of all those states, including, I'm sure, Ukraine after all this, to these. And they're going to recompartmentalize, they're going to reinforce their secrecy instead of their transparency. And this is what we are starting to see in the inquest at the moment. So the loner theory would go this way. Otherwise, I would say the timing is perfect. Because
just before the spring offensive.
Yes. So for me, there is definitely something there that is premeditated by probably an outsider government. I don't know which one. I wouldn't venture at this point. But it serves so well the Russians that I would say there is a premeditation here that fits the patterns of interference during the Trump era, during the Macron era, etc., the leaks before. So I can't help seeing a pattern here over the last few years that would still point there.
Javed Ali, should we be paying attention to the timing or more paying attention to, as we showed with what that Bellingcat journalist was saying, the manner in which this is all coming out?
Yeah, I'm more focused personally on the timing and the how. And just because I think that that's really important, at least from the US perspective, to get to the bottom of how this happened so we can prevent it from happening again. Doesn't mean that there won't be another series of leaks at some point in the future, but you're always trying to sort of prevent the last kind of big mistake from happening. So has to be a significant amount of effort on that. And it's very difficult to read in all these other potential angles about timing and foreign direction. I still, and this could be completely wrong at this point, but my gut still tells me we're dealing with a lone offender who is driven either by ideological and or personal reasons or some combination of the two. And then things started to just spiral out of control. And then other countries started to opportunistically sort of take advantage of that. That might be one of the explanations for the clumsy attempt at Russian disinformation. So that is where I'm sort of going at this point. But there's so much we don't know on the outside looking in.
Samantha de Bendren.
Yeah, I think it might not be, we might actually find out that there are a number of unrelated events that came together, that somebody, this disgruntled employee who, for whatever reason, dumped some stuff on the internet through Discord. Was it to show off? Was it for ideological reasons? And it sat there for a while because this information started to arrive at the end of last year. And then some other person realized how valuable this information was and then began to put it onto more public forum, because Discord is pretty narrow. I mean, it's really for gamers, it's for much younger people. And somebody maybe saw this and thought, oh, wow, this is hot, and put it on Twitter, put it on Telegram. And it reminds me of the whole thing about the Chinese balloon. When once that first Chinese balloon was shot down, the air defense began to lower its filters to catch a lot more objects that were flying around. And so this is probably what happened now, is that once the initial information came out, all the agencies and also journalists went onto Discord, then began trawling through some of the Twitter feeds and some of the Telegram feeds that these Discord things led to, and a lot more information came out. So it could be a series of random events which have led to this enormous thing, which highlights the whole issue of how do you control information in the digital age.
Yeah, how do you control it? And we've seen several patterns on this, Javed Ali. When it was those diplomatic cables that WikiLeaks dumped from the U.S. State Department back in 2010, 2011, it was 250,000 documents, but it wasn't put out there by one person. It was a group of people who decided to make all those documents public. In the case of Edward Snowden, he acted alone, but in a whistleblower kind of fashion. He gave it to a journalist, to a group of journalists who then meted out the information after screening it. This sounds like something different from those two previous examples.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're seeing the intersection of leaks of very sensitive intelligence information now with discrete social media channels, and that hadn't happened before. And we'll probably see more of this in the future as technology evolves, as social media continues to play such a significant influence in people's lives, certainly young people's lives, that this probably won't be the last time we see something like this, either from the US or any other country that engages in intelligence collection and espionage in its own national security interests. So this just may be sort of the wave of the future. And now it's going to be the job certainly the U.S. intelligence community and all these other countries around the world to figure out how do they deal with the dichotomy between trying to keep as much protection on this very sensitive information as you can, but with the reality of this open age driven by social media platforms.
Yeah, because we've talked about this before, Davina Frau Megs. People don't get their news from the 8 o'clock bulletin anymore on their national broadcaster. And what you just heard there from Javed Ali, which is before there was a social medium where everyone came together. Now it's fragmenting. There's all different types of social media.
Right, but they build on each other in a way, at least in the disinformation patterns and the amplification of disinformation, which is what we are seeing and describing.
Was this amplified, though? Because it was under the radar for so long.
Right. This is dormant, it's dribbling, and this we know that often.
But is it disinformation?
It's dribbled because there is the moment, the expected moment, the golden moment when the dribble meets an internal actor, enters in collision with somebody who is objectively of the same opinion or shares some of the distrust. And then that person or this group of persons is going to act. Here, probably that's what the case has been. And it's been the case with the Macron leaks in France. It had to meet the alt-right in the US. Then
this was in the 2017 campaign.
Yes. And then it turns out, years later, we found out there was a Russian cell behind the whole thing. And so it was very masked, several layers of masking, which is what is possible with those truncated and diffuse different niche social media, but then go towards the larger media. But the game for all who are behind as rogue actors of disinformation is to whitewash. You start with small, fringe, unexpected, etc. And at some point it goes big social media. It goes Twitter, as in this case, and then it goes New York Times, and then it spirals. And that's really when you have.
But is
the
that
golden
good news
shot.
with that it goes to mainstream outlets like the New York Times if they then check the facts and see?
Right. So this is the situation where we're in, which is to say that these reference mass media are the ones who have to do the job together with the internal security of the US in order to arrive at some kind of truth. What's interesting at the moment is that I don't see public opinion riled up. And that to me means they've lost their bet.
Why aren't they riled up? Because they just see this as a bit of cloak and dagger fun?
I think by now people are starting to become jaded of all this disinformation fight and these flags and false flags. Even the Russians now are saying, careful, this is a false flag. They're putting this out to give us false information. We shouldn't really believe what is going out there, etc., etc. So there's this
Or
kind of
maybe
game.
nothing, or
And
maybe
so-
none of the information is shocking. Let me put it to you, Samantha.
Right. And it confirms to us, that's the only, for me, the only damage to public opinion like you and me. We have willingly, all of us, put blinders on the disinformation about Ukraine because we've wanted to believe that Ukraine is strong and can make it, and we're supporting the small against the big, the Democrat against the autocrat, etc. And so we have been willing to believe they had less death, they had, etc., etc. Now, and this might have been manipulated. The results show the reverse. Many more deaths on the Ukrainian side than we thought, less on the Russian side. Tempered with, who knows? But to us, the only wake-up call I see is, oh, yes, I've been willing to accept the disinformation about Ukraine because as a European or as a Western country, it's acceptable.
So,
It's propaganda in times of war, fine. We'll sort out the truth later. The emergency is somewhere else.
So, Samantha de Benderen, maybe it's a question we should have asked at the beginning of the conversation. What surprised you so far in these
Well,
weeks?
very little surprised me, but I'm spend my whole day every day for the last.
Okay, then what surprised you about what surprised other people?
Okay, what surprised me about what surprised other people was that people seem surprised that the US is spying on its allies. I mean, it's a kind of. It seems to be pretty obvious. The one thing that did surprise me was the fact that Egypt has been very openly thinking of supplying weapons to Russia.
Which they deny.
Which they deny, but it seems to be something that's come out. But that, nothing else really surprised me. And the fact that Ukraine is running out of weapons, was also something that all military planners and all political scientists and everybody who's been looking at this conflict is aware of. And again, I don't see, apart from the doctored figures that were on the Russian servers on the amount of Russian deaths and the amount of Ukrainian deaths, I don't see any evidence of disinformation here. I see leaks of information that make certain people being uncomfortable. But, there are some interesting informations like which Ukrainian brigades received which kind of weapons and which kinds of training. I'm sure the Russians had that information already. That I don't see any big secret there. There are no. The thing about intelligence leaks like this, there are leaks that are perishable, i.e., when is an offensive going to take place? When is a terrorist operation going to take place? If that is leaked, plans can be changed. There's much more vital information, such as the agent's name, like who is the US's mole in the Kremlin, or who is the Kremlin's mole in the US. That is information that will have to stay secret for decades. That is kept under very different ways of classification and security. Nothing really vital, really that would cause sort of damage that cannot be repaired is out there. So that is my take from this. It is secret, maybe even stuff that's classified as top secret information, but nothing that's going to cause irreparable damage, apart from the mistrust between allies in the US, but they'll get over it.
And General Trinquant, when we're asking about who's surprised about being surprised, are you surprised that people are surprised that the U.S. seems really well informed about what's going on inside of Russia?
No, I think I'm not surprised by anything in this paper, in the paper. Just remind that this paper from the Joint Staff. They are not from the CIA or another organization. It's a planning. They are planning papers from the Joint Staff. And all the figures who are there, we have been discussing them for months on any TV program. So we are not surprised about that. The real surprise is what is this leak, either coming from inside or from someone outside taking the information, or someone fabricating the information in order to provide it to. So the only secret, the only thing interesting is that not what's inside the paper, but the way the paper were provided to the public. This is the only question, in fact.
Javed Ali, we talked earlier about how it could raise suspicions among allies. Will it raise suspicions among colleagues when they go to the office at the Pentagon?
Yeah, well, it should for some, because again, there is an investigation ongoing. I mean, I can't say that with a firsthand perspective, but again, my assumption is there is a multi-pronged investigation going on, and the folks who were involved in this are eventually going to be found, and even those who are potentially associates of the individual or individuals, they're going to be questioned as well. You know, and some of those basic kind of investigation 101 questions. What did you see? What did you know? Was there anything that was out of the ordinary? Why didn't you report it? If you could answer yes to those questions, and you know, so the pressure is going to be ramped up on people. Not that people are going to be let out of the Pentagon in handcuffs, but again, just investigators trying to do their job, do it very methodically, ask the smart questions, and eventually that pool of people that's going to start big is going to narrow into the very, very sort of inner circle of the bullseye. If you think about from an analogy perspective, it's just going to take time, and no one knows. Will this be? I don't think it's going to be days. I think it's going to take weeks and months. Hopefully, not longer than months. But eventually, that person or persons, they will be found.
All right. You heard Samantha de Benden there mention Egypt and the United States, both denying that story headlined on the front page of Tuesday's Washington Post, how Egypt planned to produce 40,000 rockets for Russia on the quiet, so Western allies didn't know about it. Similarly, Serbia's defense minister denies a report put out by the Reuters news agency this Wednesday that the only country in Europe, Serbia, that has refused to sanction Russia is agreeing to supply arms to Kyiv, or has already sent them. So that is General Trinquant. Your thoughts on this? So the Egyptians, who get a lot of military aid from the United States, according to these documents, preparing to help the Russians. We don't know if they ever did. And the Serbians, who are sending weapons to Ukraine.
Yes, I think the Egyptian, you said, have a lot of U.S. equipment, but also a lot of Russian equipment. So I'm not surprised that the link between the Egyptian army and factories and Russia are very strong. Secondly, on the Serb side, they want to be part of Europe, so they've got to be very careful about what they are doing. And during the General Assembly, there were the people who were not voting for Russia, and they were just in the middle and trying to change on 8 votes. So it's, I think they've got more interest in being closer to Europe than closer to Russia, even if their cultural link is very close to Russia.
And we've seen this sort of tightening of the screws on the part of NATO allies. Turkey, which is giving less of a long leash to Russia in recent weeks. What General Trinquant describes with Serbia. The U.S. ambassador to Hungary calling out Viktor Orban's government this Wednesday, telling it effectively to stop sitting the fence. These leaks, again, it gets back to the question I asked you about the bullets in South Korea. These leaks, are they going to make any difference as the U.S. kind of tightens the screws on its allies ahead of this spring counteroffensive?
I think it will contribute to a trend, which is rats leaving a sinking ship or not wanting anything to do with the sinking ship here being Russia.
The sinking ship is Russia.
Yeah, I would say the sinking ship is Russia. Not only because militarily it is coming across severe problems, because politically there are a lot of fault lines that are appearing internally, and there is the degree of repression that has increased in Russia in the last few weeks, the last few months, is a sign of how afraid the regime is. You know, the fact that if a 12-year-old girl does a drawing of a Ukrainian family being bombed, her father has to be hounded all the way to Belarus, extradited to face trial in Russia, shows how afraid Putin's regime is of any internal dissent. And I won't go into the details of all the other fault lines that are appearing. So yes, I think that the world and the allies are realizing that they need to back what will hopefully be the winning side, but at least the side that is holding the moral high ground.
And this brings us back to Davina Frau-Meggs' comment that the timing matters. It's happening ahead of that expected spring counteroffensive. And by the way, the U.S. Defense Secretary insisting on Tuesday that Ukraine has already gotten most of the armament that it needs. Again, in reference to those leaks, General Trinquant, ahead of the spring counteroffensive. Again, this was a snapshot of 5 weeks ago, these leaked documents. When you look at this map that we just called up of the front line now, is Ukraine in a very different position from 5 weeks ago?
Improving every week, but Ukraine hasn't currently the equipment necessary for the offensive, first point. Second point, the soldiers trained in Europe are not all back in Ukraine to serve this equipment. And third point, the weather. The weather is not still the weather suitable for an offensive. Everybody's thinking that the offensive will be probably at the end of May or June, where everything will be gathered at the same time for the offensive. So they have been speaking about the offensive weeks ago. Remember Kherson, they were talking about 2 months earlier about the offensive. So we've got time to train the people, to provide the equipment, to provide the ammunition. Remember that one figure is very interesting, is that Europe has decided to provide 1 million shell, 155 shell, by the end of May. The end of May. It's right timing.
I'm going to go out on a limb here as a non-military person and contradict a general, but I think that right now the situation in Ukraine is more critical than it was 4 or 5 weeks ago. The city of Bakhmut is still not taken by the Russians, but the Russians have managed to gain more traction in Bakhmut. The munitions problem that the Ukrainians are facing has not yet been solved. So Western tanks are arriving. Some of them are being deployed on the battlefield, but they're not used yet. There are munitions on their way. The West has pledged munitions. The trained soldiers yesterday, 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers who just left the UK after being trained, they're not yet deployed. We are now, I would say, in a very fragile junction for Ukrainians when the weapons have not arrived and the weather is still not the kind of weather that is needed for an offensive, and they are holding the lines. And things are temporarily looking difficult. And hopefully when the weapons arrive and when the new men arrive and women, that will make a difference. But this is a very fragile junction, but it's also very fragile for Russia.
Also very fragile for Russia. And just before we leave, Javed Ali, you heard earlier Davina Frau-Meggs talking about how right now, in reaction to these leaks, there hasn't been a lot of partisan bickering in the United States. When you hear our panel here in the studio in Paris describe the stakes when it comes to Ukraine, do you think that will last, particularly if, as General Trinquant predicts, it could be a while before that counteroffensive actually begins?
Yeah, I don't think these intelligence leaks are going to drive U.S. policy on Ukraine. I mean, there's already a bigger policy debate on Ukraine.
How about public opinion, though?
Yeah, public opinion, I think, seems pretty solid in terms of U.S. support for Ukraine. But what I think the divisions that we're seeing over the past few months, certainly with the flip of the U.S. House of Representatives at the beginning of the year, is that within the Republican Party, there is more dissension about what should be either the Republican plank on Ukraine or the U.S. national one. So there are some pretty loud and strong voices who are sort of at least raising questions about how long can this U.S. commitment to Ukraine last, and should it stop sooner rather than later? I think on the Democratic side seems to be more unified. So that, I think, will be the bigger driver of U.S. policy on Ukraine. I don't see these leaks really making that big of a dent in it.
We'll have to leave it there for now, unfortunately. Much more to talk about. Javed Ali, thank you so much for joining us from Ann Arbor, Michigan. I want to thank as well General Tankant de Wiener, Frau Megs. Samantha de Bendern, thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.